go. So welcome everybody to a session that is part of the career week of Wagon. It's something that we've designed specifically for our graduates, but if you're not a graduate and you happen to join today, you're very much welcome to be here. And it's a session to help you be successful in technical interviews in case you're looking for a job as a dev or largely in a tech role, which we'll also be covering. If you're here and you don't know us by any reason, like probably most of the people are ex-graduates or already know about Wagon, but if you don't know, we are traditionally a coding bootcamp, and we've been doing well for the last 3 years. We have a very good track record, and we just arrived in Singapore, and we've been operating for a couple of years already in Bali. And beyond our bootcamp, we're also partnering with companies and universities, helping them bridge the tech gap, which also kind of links nicely with what we're talking about today. So that's about us. If you want to join us, we have a full-time course starting on May 18th and another part-time course starting on July. If you're a Singaporean or PR, there's interesting funding opportunities for you. We have in-principle approval for TIPP, which means that you can be excluded of a lot of costs out of your own pocket. So if you're interested, please talk to us. And enough with the shameless plugs. We're going to get started. Just wanted to introduce you with the amazing panelists we have today, which I'm very thankful for having. We have Sam Randall with us, who's a partner at TrueSearch. It's a leading talent management company that they do end-to-end stuff from searching to recruitment to assessment to using AI to doing the best out of recruitment processes. It's very impressive what they do. And Sam has a lot of experience recruiting high-performance engineering teams, so he has a lot to share today. And we have Diego, who's a co-founder and CDO at Mattrvest, which is a fintech company. He's also an entrepreneur in residence at Antler, BC, the region, and he's also the founder of TechGround, which I didn't record in the subtitle, but that's a project that he's passionate about, and maybe Diego, you can share more about that, more about TechGround with us later. It'd be really interesting. And just to give you an idea of what we're going to be covering, we're going to be covering the process of what it is to be interviewed. You have to prep for that interview. Once you have gotten into an interview, you have to know how to be in the interview, how to conduct yourself, how to produce good answers, how to pass technical challenges. If after that interview is gone, there's a lot of questions about what happens next, how to follow up, how to behave during the post-interview process. And hopefully at the very end, we have some time to talk about warning signs. So an interview is a two-way process, and you also need to know if you're going into the right company or not. And maybe Diego and Sam can share some of the horror stories that they might have seen, some of their frontline experience at recruitment. So if that is good and clear for everybody, just wanted to let you know that we're going to be using Slido for the event today to collect your questions. At the beginning, I will be leading and asking a few questions that we have prepared and if you will find insightful. And later we'll have another section to do a little bit of Q&A with you. So please be sure to go to Slido. Prima, who's with us today, probably most of you know him. He's helping me in the background, co-facilitating this. And you can go to app.slide.deal event. The link is over there in the chat. And you can leave your questions. Whatever you vote will bubble up to the top. So without further delay, let's get started into preparation, the first part of the interview. And I just wanted to ask you guys how to think about preparing for an interview. Also considering that most of our alumni, they are Rails developers. The stack that they control is Ruby on Rails. They know SQL, they know Postgres, they know JavaScript. How should they think about preparing for the interview when they're in that part? I'm going to stop my share so I can put the highlight on you.
Okay, who do you want me to, should I start with my my thoughts on that?
Go for it.
Okay, great, thank you. Sorry, Diego, just barging in front of you there. So I think really prep for the interview is key. You know that really the key parts of it obviously are going to be the technical aspects if you're interviewing for a technical role. However, there's a couple of things outside of that you need to look at as well. So really the first part is knowledge prep. So what does that look like? You need to find out about the company. What does the company do? I think that one of the first questions people ask in almost any interview is, what do you know about TrueSearch? What do you know about whatever company it is sort of you're interviewing for? If you don't have a good answer, or if you haven't got at least a little bit of content, immediately it makes it look like you don't really care about the job. You don't really care about what's going on there. So you need to understand the company, you need to understand what the role, so read the job description in great detail. If you're working with a recruiter, ask them a lot about the role, the company, the team, and really sort of try and understand who is going to interview you during that first interview. I think it's that's sort of the main part, is getting that knowledge, that sort of baseline knowledge to understand the role, the team, the company. From there, then I think you have the skills preparation, which I'm sure Diego will talk a bit more about, understanding the technology, swatting up on tests and everything like that. And then I'm sure we'll go into that in a bit more detail. But I think one thing that a lot of people don't make time for, and this is a really, really key thing to do right before you go into the interview, get there early, take 10 minutes, have a bit of quiet time, a bit of reflection time, think through your answers, focus and just mentally prepare for that session. You know, put a smile on your face the moment you walk in the door, but have that sort of quiet time where you're just collecting your thoughts before you go into the interview.
So yeah, just to add to answer Sam, in terms of company research, there are many things that you can do actually to work on this. So you can look at Glassdoor, for example. You can look at LinkedIn. You can look in LinkedIn, how many people is working there, what kind of profiles, what kind of engineers are working there. You can look and also at their websites on different products. You can try their products. You can try to look for, Easter eggs in their websites. You can look at the source code and see if there is a challenge shows in the source code, something that you can maybe bring to the interview later. Look for all these small details that are plus points, when you are in the interview. That means that you are really keen into joining this company and you put some effort into, discovering what they are doing and also understanding their mission, their products, and so on. So really look for these details, and there are, plenty of sources, LinkedIn, as I mentioned, Glassdoor, and so on. Also, if they have a public GitHub and some repos over there to see what about their tech. Now, when it comes to the technical preparation, also there are plenty of resources and things that you can, do. There is a very famous website called Interview Cake, which is very popular in the US, and there are similar ones that you can actually start preparing yourself and looking at all those, standard algorithms and standard practices, or, puzzles and challenges that these companies in the Bay or even in other countries, they give to candidates during these interviews. So you can just try these challenges. You can go to Hacker Bronk, you can go to these websites and just make yourself comfortable with these kind of problems, and also take the time, measure the time and try to find different solutions, and also explain even to yourself or write down the approaches that you follow. So there are plenty of things that you can do. And as Sam mentioned, please be, there are other things that are important as well. So be punctual. Please prepare your environment. This is really important, make sure that the connection works. You are in a quiet space. There is no interruption, or there will not be an interruption during the interview. So pay attention to those small details that really count, and that somehow speaks, to the interviewer, and really gives the feeling that you really want this job, right? And because, the HR and the companies actually put a lot of effort to make you, to put you in front of the interviewer. So make all those effort count, and, show your interest about the company, about the JD, and so on. So again, in terms of preparation, pay attention to these details and be ready, be punctual, and so on. There are other things that we can discuss a bit later, but this is what comes to my mind when we discuss preparation.
And I think, sorry, I was going to sort of add on to that.
Take it away.
Thank you. I think sort of in your preparation stages, I think it's really important to sit down and spend a bit of time brainstorming before your interview. And there are a few things you need to know going into the interview. Firstly is who is going to be attending the interview from the client side, what format the interview is going to take, and is there anything you need to prepare specifically for that interview? And these are all questions you can ask your recruiter or the HR or the hiring manager or whoever it is. And I think it's particularly important if you're working with somebody who isn't necessarily a recruitment professional, somebody that runs the recruitment cycle professionally, like a hiring manager. It's important to make sure that they're giving you this information, because they may not immediately think about it. So, if you haven't got enough information before the interview, feel free to send them a note and say, do I need to prepare anything? who's going to be in the interview, what format will it take, how long will it last, because that's all gives you a sort of a sense of what's going to happen during that session. I would also spend time looking specifically at preparing questions for the interviewer for this role, and that will be things like, what are the expectations of this role? What does success look like in this role to you? And that could be in a short, mid, and long-term sort of space. You can ask, what support will I have coming into this role? You know, if there are new technologies you need to pick up, how quickly am I expected to get up to speed? And I think that, you know, you have to be a little bit careful how you ask this question, but it's definitely worth preparing something like this. But it's like, you know, has there been anybody on the team who didn't work out? You know, who was the last person that left, and why did they go? And the answer to that question will tell you an awful lot about the organization. And, you know, I think if you hear of a number of people leaving it, and it's always the hiring manager, maybe there's a hiring manager problem. Maybe they brought somebody in who wasn't well skilled for that job, and they didn't give them the support. So you have to be quite sensitive about how you ask that. And then the last thing I would do during preparation is, if there's 2 or 3 key things that you are looking to get across in that interview, sort of key successes, or even key failures, things you've learned from and you've reflected on and you've improved your performance about, then I think have those written down somewhere as well, so you can work those into your answers as you go.
Nice, thank you very much for that. I wanted to ask as well, you know, depending on where are you applying, you might be applying to a big corporation, you may be applying to a startup, you might be applying to an SME. Does that change how you should go about the preparation phase at all?
Yes, let me start. Actually, yes, that somehow, you know, shapes how you need to prepare, actually how you are going to deliver the interview later. But first of all, you need to be aware of, you know, when you're applying to a startup, maybe you need to be aware that maybe they're looking for people willing to, you know, wear many hats, and maybe willing to learn, willing to do many things. And perhaps I would not say the bar is low or lower, but they're looking, you know, for people eager for challenges and just to learn, right? And maybe the pay is not that great, but you need to be really aware of those things. And then if you're applying for a corporate, it's kind of the opposite sometimes, right? So you need to really be mindful about, you know, maybe you are applying for a very specific role within the corporate or this huge organization. And maybe the pay is high, right? But they are really looking for domain expertise, for experience in a particular, you know, technology or tool. And these kind of things are quite opposite, right? But you really need to be aware of that. And that also helps you to, you know, prepare the questions that you're going to ask, and also to prepare yourself to be ready for maybe questions that, you know, if you're interviewing with a startup, they might ask you things that maybe are outside of the scope of the JD that you looked at before, or they will ask you more soft skills, let's say, questions, because maybe they're looking for someone, you know, more like a co-founder, or, you know, someone to work very close with. Whether if you apply for or you're going to get an interview with a corporate, then maybe it will be really specific, right? Really about how you go about using this technology to solve this particular problem, right? And you really need to keep that in mind when you're applying. And this also, you know, the interview styles are completely different, because I had the chance to actually interview for both, I would say. When you are in a startup, you are really looking for people willing to learn many new things, right? Eager for challenges and stuff like that. So sometimes you don't know what the interviewer will ask you, but you need to be really, really aware of these things. And again, maybe the workload and things that you might expect to do in a startup are different, completely different if you compare with a corporate, a huge company, right?
I would agree. So in the domain or the role specific prep that you'll be doing for a startup versus a big corporate is likely to be quite different. I think it's sometimes you shouldn't necessarily make assumptions around how particular teams behaved based on the size of the company. I've spoken to people who said, I never want to work in a bank, and 2 months later I've placed them into a bank and they're super happy with their role. And so part, you know, some of the time when you have opportunities come up, they could be quite interesting opportunities within environments you think aren't necessarily sort of wonderful environments for creativity and technology and things like that. I think conversely as well, sometimes with those early stage startups, if people are new founders or they're new to leadership or they're new to their position, I think sometimes they don't necessarily have wonderful management skills, and they don't delegate and they don't give freedom particularly well because they're still working it out themselves. I think what's really key during process with anybody, and I use this all the time, is to make sure you're asking lots of questions. Make sure you're understanding how they go about things. If they ask you why you did something, or if they ask you to tell you about a time that you did a particular task or you solved a particular problem, if it's appropriate, ask them, can I ask why you're asking that? And the reason why they're asking that, it will then give you an understanding of what they want out of the answer. I think sometimes people get a little bit Q&A within interviews. They start just answering the questions put in front of them, and try and dissect the question a little bit more to understand really what they mean by that question. But that's a slightly more complex questioning skill. So anyway, sorry.
This last question from me on the prep side. So imagine that I get notified right now, I get an email for an interview for a backend engineer position that I'm getting tomorrow at 10 in the morning, right? I have until 10 in the morning to prep for the interview. What would you tell me? It's like, this is the most important thing you should prepare.
Well, if you ask me personally, I will just, have a good sleep, rest really well. But before that, really brainstorm, as Sam was saying, just spending 1 hour or two, spending some time, understanding about the role, about the company. And just about that, and have a, good sleep and a good rest to be ready, and, to be ready to take on challenges, and, to really focus during the interview. I will not put too much pressure into, solving, problems and just practicing some stuff, because you don't really have time. And those things, doing something overnight don't work really well. And when you're under pressure in this particular situation they mentioned, perhaps you really need to rest. But do your homework. Do really look into the company and, resources available to find out more about the company. And perhaps, just to be a quick hint, if they are doing something like this, you might really consider taking an interview or working in that company. Just
right.
A little hint over there.
Right. Warning signs over there. Absolutely.
Cool. I would agree. I think there's try not to get too caught up in it. I think prepare your knowledge on the company. Try to understand the role. Try and get a good night's sleep, and also without sort of trying to sort of rub it home. I think it's definitely make sure that at some point during the conversation with the interviewer, you say, hey, I'm sorry, I've not had more time to prep. I got the call last night for this session. Really keen to get involved. Super happy that I can speak to you right now, but I'm sorry I don't have more prep. So you just make sure, because sometimes if it came through HR, it might just appear in the hiring manager's calendar the next day, and they don't know that you've only been given 12 hours notice. So I think definitely sort of just slip that into conversations so that they know that you've done everything you can with the time that you've been given, and that you've been as flexible as you can to make it to that session.
And one important thing to add, this is something that most people overlook, but it's actually important. In fact, it's really important if you really want to get that job or work in that company later on. If you don't show up, please tell them, I can't make it. Please reschedule. I have something to do. Please reschedule. Let's find a different slot. Please tell them with some time, with some buffer. Even if they gave you a notice like last night, still tell them that you are not attending, because some companies, they have this policy, like if you don't show up, they don't call you anymore. Some companies, they do have these kind of policies. And also it's a nice gesture from your side to let them know that maybe you are not appearing, you're not attending, and maybe you want to find a better time to conduct the interview. So please pay attention to this and do it if you're not attending.
Fantastic. That's really good stuff. Thank you, guys. So that we've done with the prep. We're really well prepped. We go into the interview, and just for the sake of going into the mind of the interviewer, also because both you, Sam, and Diego, you represent probably different perspectives. You edge much more on the technical side, Diego, although you probably also value other things. And then Sam is probably on the other way. Then how do you go about assessing a candidate? How do you look at different skills, different competencies? How much weight do you put into engineering practices versus soft skills? How do you go about reasoning if a person is competent or not?
Sam, you go first.
Yeah, okay, sure. I think so. As somebody who has not come from a technical background and who is by far the worst technician on this call, it's something obviously I've had to sort of learn how to do from a more functional perspective, is to screen people technically. So if I'm speaking to a developer, the sort of questions I'll be asking will be sort of very open-ended questions. I'll be asking, what are you currently working on? What languages are you working in? What role in the team do you play? Are you building this from scratch? Or are you modifying it from somebody else's code? And and really the sort of where I'm going with that is I'm trying to compare their answers to what they've written on their profile. And I think one thing to bear in mind is, don't overinflate your technology ability on your profile, because they will find out very, very quickly during the interview. If you say, you know, I do TDD on everything, and then they give you a problem and you don't use TDD on it, they're going to be like, why didn't you use test-driven development? So, so from a technical perspective, that's how I will look. I think really what I'd like to see in somebody's answers is somebody who has a sort of a clear and concise story to tell, where they are in their career, where they want to go, what they've done, what their successes are. I think it's really important for people to show the ability to reflect during an interview. I think, you know, people like to really, you know, I really don't like to hire anybody for myself who can't answer a question on what areas of themselves they'd like to improve. I don't care so much about what the weaknesses are. I care that they are self-aware enough to understand that they may have some areas from which to improve. You know, if people come in and say, I don't need any help on that, then 9 times out of 10 they do, but 9 times out of 10 they won't want to take any guidance on things. So really, I think from that side, it's just making sure that you've got well thought through answers, that you're logical, there's no gaps in your CV, that you've got a story to tell throughout your sort of profile, and that you're just sort of everything's sort of matching up.
Yeah, definitely I agree with what you said, Randall. Sam, sorry.
So either works.
Yeah. So really, I just agree with that. Even I'm, you know, a technical interviewer. I'm a software engineer myself. So of course, I look for hard skills. I look for how you can solve problems and you know, deliver. But when I have to weight these different things, soft skills, hard skills, communication, I really emphasize more soft skills. I think soft skills and communication are really important. First of all, because you are not going to work alone. Please keep this in mind. You're not going to work alone. So really you need to, like Sam was saying just now, keep your, you know, speech and story very consistent. And you know, you need to really be a great communicator, because if you need to get some training, if you need to get better at certain technologies, that's okay. Companies are willing to train you. Engineers or different teams will take you, you know, to some journey just to learn new stuff. So you get familiar with the domain, with the company, with the products and what they do, and also with their tech. So don't worry that much about that, but really look into your soft skills. And these things are completely overlooked all the time. I conducted more than 1,000 interviews, I think, today. Yeah. In different countries, you know, I spoke to different people, different seniorities, different levels for different technologies, and all the time it's the same. The problem is the same. You know, people is not sometimes not only communicating well stuff, but it's not really behaving well during the interview. You know, people is not really, you know, polite, or people sometimes gets angry during interviews. So look at your soft skills. Don't of course, the environment should be warm and friendly and casual, you know, it doesn't need to be really rigid, but don't cross the line, don't overreact, or don't say things that are out of, you know, context sometimes. So really look for these things, and don't overlook these facts, these elements, and really communicate well. And as Sam was saying, be transparent and honest about your skills. Even when you're writing your resume, don't say things that you didn't work with or you never achieved, because these things will come back to you during the interview. Remember, you're speaking to a person that is technical and senior enough to make a fair assessment of your skills. So if you are not sure, or if you didn't work in a particular technology, don't say that you have 3, 4, 5 years of experience with that, because it's really easy to spot that. And as I mentioned, you're not going to work alone. And the engineer in the other side, or the person interviewing you in the other side, perhaps will be working with you in the future. And this person is looking for a colleague, for someone to spend, really a considerable, really a huge amount of time. And when you're interviewing someone, you're looking for, okay, can I work with this person? Do I really want to work with this person? If this person is not honest, or, is failing at these soft skill things. So really keep the whole thing, keep the whole story together and be consistent, and don't, another important thing, don't mention things that you never ever achieved. Let's say I'm working in this amazing company and we are doing millions of dollars. The company is doing millions of dollars, or we successfully launched this product, or we raised this much money. The interview is about yourself. It's not about the company. So please don't mention all these facts that don't really add to your profile. And sometimes the interviewer see this as, you are taking credit for things that perhaps you didn't do, right? So I'm not sure if I really want to work with someone like you, okay? So really look at these elements that is easy to overlook, because you can say that, yeah, if I say that I know Golang really well and I work in microservices for 5 years, so I've been doing React for 10 years, even more than the years of React has in the market. You might think that, yeah, I look great in paper, but the interviewer will find out, and this thing will haunt you and will not really help you to get the job in the end.
We kind of have this joke in tech recruitment that the first coding language on the CV is their major, the second coding language on their CV is a minor, the third one was one they did at university, and the fourth one was they sat next to a guy doing it once. So the more you and I'm sure that's a bit flippant, but I think the more sort of focused you are on your profile, the more focused you are, the easier it is. The hiring managers really looking to find out the answer to 3 or 4 very basic questions. Can you do the job? If the answer to that is yes, will they fit into the team? Will they fit into this role, into the organization? Next is, if their technical skills are lacking, do they have the right approach and aptitude and potential to pick those technical skills up quickly? And then the last bit is, do they know their limitations? Am I going to be able to give them guidance? So I think that's really, also remember, interviews are kind of like, it's like a maths exam, right? You still get points if you get the wrong answer, but you show good working. So it's really important that if you're given a challenge, that you can logically explain how you're going about it, or you can, that you're showing the right sort of behaviors mentally to go about solving it. You're showing the right problem solving aptitude. I think that's important. So it's, when you're in the interview, it's very easy to get very flustered. It's very easy to get sort of caught up in the moment. So if you're asked a question, don't be afraid to get clarification on what they mean. Confirm the understanding. Repeat the question back to them to make sure that you get it right. Because the last thing you want to do is spend 10 minutes giving a particularly flowery sort of description of an answer, which then turns out to be the wrong answer. And then if you're asked a question, take a moment to think, reflect, and then present your answer to that question in a logical, well thought out way. It doesn't matter if you sit there in silence for 15, 20 seconds while you think of your answer. That's much better than going straight into the answer and then going off all over the place. So yeah.
But also, let me just add a little bit of, another sort of advice, if you call it. If after all the steps that Sam was mentioning, you get a question and maybe you need to think really well and try to find an answer for that. But if after some time maybe you ask for a clarification and so on, but still you didn't get it, or maybe you don't know about, you know the answer, you don't know the particular product, the technology, the tool, say, I don't know, say it. This is really, really important. It's more important than saying anything else that is not relevant at all, okay? So please say, I don't know. You can add some however or but. I do know this, and I do know this and that are related, to this particular question. But to be honest, I don't know. And I'm really looking forward to learn that, to apply in the future, or just to really understand what it's all about. But say, I don't know, because interviewers really appreciate that, your honesty, your transparency.
Absolutely. That honesty and that signal of that willingness to learn is absolutely fundamental. I would like to piece down some of the things that you mentioned. Like, we were looking at behaviors. We're also looking at technical knowledge. Like, what are some of the questions that you like to ask to evoke things that you deem absolutely critical, whether it's on the soft skill side or the technical side?
Sam?
Yeah. So I think sort of two or three that spring to mind. The first one is I like people to talk me through. I like people to talk me through what they've done in great detail. So it's like, okay, talk me through what you did there. Talk me through your choices on technologies. Talk me through your choices on your architecture. Why did you do that? And then that gives me a really interesting sort of insight. You know, as a technologist, you don't necessarily, as a technology recruiter, you don't necessarily need to understand technology to understand when somebody's struggling to articulate an answer. And typically, if they're struggling to articulate an answer, it means that they either don't know enough about it, they haven't thought enough about it, or they didn't do it. So you can sort of pick up on almost sort of hesitations and things within that conversation, which then can lead you to ask questions about a particular thing. And then it's very clear when people go into the either that I don't know, or they start sort of trying to fill in the blanks. Other questions I like is interviewers particularly like to use behavioral-based interview questions. And behavioral-based interview questions are: give me an example of a time when you overcame a challenge and you learned from it, or give me a indication of a time where you reflected on something you were doing and decided to improve upon yourself. And basically the idea of these questions is that they ask a sort of theoretical point, and then they give you an opportunity to tie that sort of theory back into your actual behaviors and what you've actually done. So it makes it much more sort of specific to the interviewer, to the question. I'm not sure that was a direct answer to that question, but anyway. So.
But okay, from a technical perspective, of course, I do ask a lot about the basics of technologies, because in the JD you have particular technologies and keywords, right? So if you're applying for a job, you know the basics. So you do know a bit of that. So you need to really answer these basic questions. But those are important, I would say. But not, you know, I don't put too much weight on that. But you really need to know basics on your stuff. Now, I would like to ask similar things as Sam was mentioning. Tell me about the most challenging project or task or feature that you had a chance to work on so far. And tell me why, in two different ways. Tell me why this was the most challenging for you due to technical reasons, but also tell me about a different project, or tell me about the same, why this was difficult for non-technical reasons. And sometimes you find very interesting answers. Sometimes in the tech side, you find that maybe they have some technical issues, or you know, lack of resources. They just made some decisions with the team, or even the candidate himself or herself, right? But they provide you a good level of detail sometimes, and you can really measure and assess, okay, you really know your stuff, you had a chance to work in this challenging project at that time, so that's great. Now, when you ask a complex project for non-technical reasons, sometimes you find that the candidates are a bit conflicted. You find candidates blaming the team, blaming managers, and not taking responsibility about things or problems, or, you know, failures or issues within their companies or projects. And this is sometimes something that you can spot by asking this question. People will tell you sometimes, you know, the managers are really bad. They give us really terrible requirements, and, you know, the client is like this, like that. And they never said that maybe I made a wrong decision, maybe I did something wrong, maybe we didn't communicate really well. Sometimes candidates just, you know, blame on others, and sometimes they say other things, but you get a hint of maybe how conflicted this person might be, and you get also a better understanding if the person might be a good, you know, culture fit or not for the team. So I like to ask these kind of questions about technical challenges and non-technical challenges. And also I like to ask, you know, what do you want to learn next? Let's say if you get the chance to learn something else this year, right? Over the next, you know, for the rest of 2020, what kind of things you want to learn? And some candidates say maybe really backwards technologies, like, oh, you know, I want to work with Algol. Like, why? I want to learn, you know, this particular archaic technology. Okay, that's good perhaps, but looking at the market, at what companies are doing, maybe you should be looking at other things, right? sometimes they don't really have this, a bigger or a good understanding of what's going on out there. And instead of looking into, new stuff or stuff that is relevant, sometimes they're looking into these things. So I look for those signs, and I look for, as I mentioned, I really like to ask about challenges and how they overcame or they deliver for those projects.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Just to have an idea of your priorities, right? Like, of course, there's so many technical roles, different levels of seniority in them, but what is kind of your must-have list in a dev role, and what are things that, let's say, are nice to have? Like, if you have them, perfect, but it's okay not to have. And what are the things like are absolute must?
I think a must, again, soft skills, a must, communication skills, and really being open to learn new stuff. These things are a must, being a team player, and nice to have, I would say, having a very deep knowledge about certain, technologies, about a certain domain. I think those skills are somehow secondary. It really depends on the organization and the company you're interviewing with, but in general, for me, it's really important, communication, collaboration skills, and how do you go about solving problems. These kind of soft skills are really important and a must.
Interesting. Sam, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think if I'm typically when I'm speaking to a hiring manager, I'll ask them the same question. So I'll say, what are the three things that this must have? And typically, the first and key one for a dev role is they must be very proficient at the key language. That's the sort of the basic point. And then depending on the seniority of the person that they're interviewing, will then depend on how much other stuff they need to have around that. So core proficiency of that language is really important. I think outside of that, it's the hiring managers that I've worked with have all liked to have people who have a very inquisitive mindset, people who are sort of true technologists. They'll code in their spare time. They'll get excited about new technologies. They'll have a GitHub. Hiring managers love to see a GitHub account on the CV. They love to see that sort of level of sort of, I guess, sort of love for the language, and then outside of that, it's a culture fit to the team. So.
Yeah, so that's something to add here, because it's great to see you have your account in Stack Overflow, you have your GitHub with plenty of repositories, but careful, don't cheat, don't keep forking repositories, because it's very easy to spot that you actually didn't code. You kept cloning repositories and stuff like that. So don't, again, be honest and transparent. Don't try to look, don't just do these kind of things, I interviewed several candidates, with very nice, for maybe HR, recruiters. Oh, this person has like 70, 80 repositories on GitHub. And then when I went to see, yes, but all of them are forked. There is no single commit from this person at all. So please don't do that.
That's terrible. That's absolutely terrible. And also, just maybe in the audience, we have people who are looking for dev roles, but maybe we have people who are looking for kind of tech roles, handshake roles like product management, business analyst, or anything around those lines. So how would you go about evaluating if that person has enough technical expertise, even though they don't have to be an absolute expert in a technology?
You go first.
Okay, thanks. I mean, I guess it's just finding out, again, it's questioning mostly about what they've done in their previous roles, and just, it's the continually asking questions and finding a thread and then mining that thread down as far as you can. So if somebody said, I was involved in the build of this, it's like, wonderful. What was your role? What was your role? Who were the other people in the team? What did they do? What interactions did you have with them? And so it's really about understanding that. And then from there, people will naturally start either going more functional or more technical, depending on how their role was.
Yeah, and for these particular roles, I like to ask those kind of things, tell me about what kind of things you did in the past, but also give them some real world scenarios. It could be related to the domain or to the company we're hiring for, but give some real world scenarios. How do they go about solving this problem? How do they go about, making some decisions for some trade-offs? What kind of technical solutions they bring to the table? What kind of tools do they use? or what kind of tools are interested, they are interested to add in the future, and how do they go about managing, different trade-offs and resources? How do they go about talking to different stakeholders? What kind of details, I'm the CEO of the company. Tell me how you're going to solve this problem. Tell me how, and then you explain to me. Now I'm a developer. Tell me how or what do I need to do. So try to give them real scenarios, or I try to give them real scenarios, and just as Sam was saying, trying to understand and see how they go about answering how deep the question, the answers are, in technical terms, or using, their expertise in the domain.
Very interesting, very interesting. But I think that really speaks, like the ability to adapt your communication depending on who you have in front of you, whether you have the product manager or you have the developer, the technical lead, or whether you have the UX person. It's so interesting. Also, of course, the screening interview, the initial interview, is not just all the process. There's so many other things, right? Like it is a process that could span for weeks, and then you go into coding challenges, you could go into whiteboard challenges, you could do so many other things. So any tips of how to conduct yourself during a really difficult coding challenge or a very difficult kata that you have to do, or maybe a takeaway assignment, what would you suggest to our listeners?
Well, there are different things here. Some companies, a few are giving some homework, some tests, some tasks that you can do at home or over the weekend, or they give it. Sometimes they don't give it even a deadline or time to send them back the task. But this kind of, I'm not a big fan of this kind of test, because actually you're doing some work and you're not getting paid sometimes, and sometimes you are not really receiving help. You don't have someone to talk to. But if you're getting a task like that, make sure that you try to ask questions and try to let them know that you're alive and working on that. But again, I'm not a big fan of this approach in general. But if you are getting this sort of take-home test, engage the person that sent that to you, and really keep the communication open and ask questions, mention different approaches and how you are trying to solve the problem. Ask if you can use a particular technology, a particular programming language or framework. Please keep communicating with the person. Don't just, don't reply and then 3 weeks later send the test back, because most likely because they didn't hear from you, maybe they really think that maybe you're not a great communicator and you're not really keen. So that's my approach for that. That's my opinion for that kind of outside test. Now, when it comes to the coding challenge, the live coding test, people is looking for your ability to solve problems and actually how you perform under pressure. But just be, make yourself comfortable and don't overthink about it, okay? And think that the person in front of you is trying to find a colleague, a friend, someone to work with, okay? So the person is not giving you this in bad faith, I would say. So just try to focus on the problem. Ask as many questions you want or wish about the problem. If it's not really clear, ask for more examples. Try to come up with examples, but do really explain how you're going to solve it. Maybe before or while along implementation, do speak to the interviewer. And also, what at some points is if you get the chance to, come up with different approaches. Let's say you have the most efficient approach, or the so-so, but the most doable because you have limited time, or the best approach, but it will take a while. So explain all these decisions that you're making along implementation, and give them the sense that you can make these first, assessments and decisions. And please explain well what you're trying to do. And if there is some syntax problem or something that you're not really sure how to write or how to do, because maybe you need the, you need the IntelliSense, or sometimes you don't have the best editor to do this, this live coding test. Don't ask to Google, okay? Don't ask to do, just tell them, I can't remember this function in particular, but I know that there is this function and it does this and that. But please don't ask, oh, can I Google? Can I do this and that? Because that gives, of course, all of us will use Google all the time, and it's part of the job actually, and Stack Overflow and so on. But that's not always the first answer. If you are getting a problem and then you ask, oh, can I Google? Well, yes, if you get a job also you can Google, but here, please tell me, how do you go about solving the problem? And if there is a syntax problem, let's try to work together. Maybe I will give you, as an interviewer, I will give you the answer. Oh, use this function, use this and that, or implement it in this way, or just put a comment. It doesn't really matter the syntax at some point, but it's how do you behave and how do you go about solving the problem?
I think this goes back to the maths question analogy, where it's, you know, I think when you're presented with a coding challenge, typically there's two aspects to it. There's the problem, which will be some sort of logical problem, and then there'll be you'll have to, the solution will come in two parts. It will be the actual functional solution to it, how the algorithm looks, how the process looks, what you need to do to solve that problem, and then you'll have the technical solution to that problem, which will be, okay, how do I code that? How do I code that algorithm? I think when you're things to be doing if you're interviewing is, a lot of the time this is a kind of a mental agility kind of sort of standpoint. So if you're actively interviewing and you're going through a lot of processes which are or you're planning to go through a lot of processes which will require you to go through some sort of coding challenge, some sort of problem solving challenge, then get practicing on those problem solving challenges, because the first time you come across a problem, or the first time you have to gear your mind up to solving a problem like that, that's the hardest. Now, if you've been doing a couple a day for the last couple of weeks and somebody puts a problem in front of you, there's a chance you might have seen something like that problem before, which means that you fast forwarded yourself 15-20 minutes in coming with the solution. And I think the other thing is that, again, so to Diego's point, when you're actually writing your code, make sure that you're doing everything you can to make that code as concise and as well annotated, and don't assume that the person reading it is gonna understand anything you've written. Every time you put a function in, write the description of it. That's just basic code hygiene, which I know very little about. Get Uncle Bob's book, Clean Coding. Have a read of that, and really try and get your your actual code to look and feel and behave as good as you possibly can. That's your showcase. And if you're a bit off, that's fine. They want to see that very clear thought process, and then they want to see that thought process is executed in code. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that you really hit it home with that math mentality, where you go into the challenge thinking that you really need to nail it. And actually what the interviewer is really interested in is how you think, how do you communicate that thought, how you create shared context, and how can you collaborate with somebody else in a way that somebody will want to work with you. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to move into the follow-up. Imagine the interview has gone through and now we have to wait to see what happens. So just by the way, we're getting a Slido on the screen because we have many questions around the preparation, but if you have questions about anything else that involves the recruitment process, please post them. The code is over there. And imagine you've done your interview, you think you've done well, but selections processes, they always involve so many people to approve, so many people to talk to, especially in big companies, and you might have to wait. How to deal with that wait, how to hang on to the interview? What are your thoughts on that?
I think if you're, I guess, sort of to talk around that slightly, at the end of the interview session, qualify with the interviewer what the next steps are and how long the next step should take. They may not know. If they don't know, that's fine. But then always follow up with an email afterwards, thanking whoever's email you have, thank them for the time, extend your thanks on to the interviewer, and then requalify that next step, and then you can hold them to those next steps. Obviously, don't email. If they're a day late, don't email them daily for the next week and waiting for an answer. You give them a couple of days after their deadline, send a follow-up. Often what happens in businesses is that the hiring is the most important thing until it's not. And if you've got sudden production issues, or you've got some sort of deliverable to go out, there's a new campaign that the company are running, then everything else goes on hold, and you might not hear from anybody for a week. Like, that's going to be really frustrating time for you. For the interviewers, they're like, I really must get back to that guy, but I'm so busy right now that there's not a thing I can do. So definitely follow up, sort of set the expectations of when you're going to follow up, and then follow up. But then if they don't come back to you immediately, give them a little bit of time. So the worst thing you can do is too much follow up. So
Correct. And coming to that, please do follow up, as Sam was saying, but follow up with the person that arranged the interview. Follow up with the person that is in HR. I would say that it's not really great sometimes to follow up if you had the chance to speak with an engineer, with a developer, or someone else for a technical interview. Don't follow up with that person in particular, because that person perhaps is doing several interviews, so he's not aware really about the process and if they are hiring or not this particular candidate, right? So please don't follow up with those engineers, because they are not really aware and they're busy actually. And sometimes to do these interviews, they take time from their actual work and they feel a bit bothered sometimes. So please don't bring these questions to them. Keep the discussion with and following up with the HR, department, those who arrange this, the interview and the call, because engineers, sometimes they don't really know what's going on and they will not go and ask HR on behalf of you, right? So please follow up with the right person in the company. Otherwise, feels like, if you do too much follow up, it doesn't look really well on your side, right?
Right. Any tips to give in terms of when you follow up appropriately to really signal that you really want this job and that you're really motivated and willing to learn?
Okay, I'd say send them an email the day of the interview or the following day. Not leave it a couple of hours. Don't send it in the text on the way home. And that should be basically for the interview. It should be just a thank you note. Don't ask them to action anything else. Send another note to the person who's organised the interviews and just requalify your expectations or ask when next steps will be. And then really, then wait. They should come back to you with some feedback within a few days. I think it's as an industry, the single biggest problem with recruitment, whether it's through an agency or whether it's direct, is lack of feedback. So you're going to have to just accept that sometimes you're just not going to get feedback, and that sucks. But what you can do is set the time aside to write a nice email thank you, follow up if you have a time where they said they're going to follow up within, but there's only so much you can do, I guess.
Just to add to another, maybe it's more like a don't related with this follow-up. You can perhaps add people to LinkedIn, connect with people you spoke to in that company. But again, don't follow up, don't send, constant messages to the person, perhaps in LinkedIn. That sometimes doesn't help you at all, because again, the person is not really aware about the process, it's not aware about your candidacy and if they're hiring or not you, right? So that's something to pay attention, follow up with the right person and with the time that Sam was saying just now.
Thank you so much. And just now moving more into the two-way, right? How do you go about evaluating a company? Because just my experience, I was working in Germany and I was working with these agencies sometimes, and none of these agencies did any TDD, any testing, right? So if you got hired by them, that meant that you would go into a project with hundreds of thousands of lines of code and not a test written. So that's not a place where you want to be as a junior developer. What are some of the things that you should ask in the interview to notice if there's something that indicates that you should not be joining that company at all?
I think just from my perspective, when I'm asking questions of hiring managers, I'll try and sort of establish how sophisticated, how mature their sort of environment is. So do they have a fully automated DevOps pipeline? Are they, is everything automated all the way through? Do they have test scripts written in? And typically I'll get an answer like, so do you guys got sort of test automation in? They're like, yep, totally. And like 100% all the way through, they're like, well, no. So firstly, don't take the first answer as the answer. Drill down a bit, ask a couple of specific things, and if, and a lot of companies really want to have that and they don't necessarily have it. So it's about that's fine. Understanding I think it's more about understanding the environment you're going into and then being prepared to work in that environment or not. I don't think that's necessarily answering your question though. I'll hand over to Diogo while I think of something more interesting.
No, but I agree with that. You need to really ask, about automation, the tools that they are using, because also perhaps you need to get familiar with those tools if you get the job, right? So please ask about development process, maybe improvements, things that they want to do, or what are the next challenges, why they are hiring so many people, why are we having this interview, what kind of things you want to build on, what kind of, new products you want to launch. So ask about these things and also mention that you did your homework, right? And so what the company is doing, perhaps, you know, the domain. So ask, okay, what are the new stuff, new things that you're about to launch related to this domain, right? And you also showcase yourself, telling that, you know, I really believe in the mission and the vision of this company, and I maybe think that you should do this and that. Just few lines, right? And then try to ask, okay, what are you doing to address these particular things? And you can ask about also how the team is split in terms of, you know, are the guys working in squads? Are the guys working in silos? You know, sometimes companies, especially maybe all companies with an own mindset, they put people in silos. So all mobile developers here, all DevOps here, all the front ends here. Or some people, they work in squads. So they combine DevOps, front end, you know, mobile into one single squad to deliver projects. So look for those kind of things and understand a bit more how they are doing things internally. And as Sam was saying, sometimes they really don't have pretty much automation or, you know, CI and pipelines, or maybe a high level of code coverage and testing, but maybe they're willing to do that, and maybe that's why they're hiring you. So please ask these questions to understand the stage of the company and the challenges ahead in the technical side, and also in the business a little bit, to really make sure that you are familiar with the domain.
I think you can ask straight up. You can say, what, you know, what are the, you know, as you know, you can, if the person is the team lead or the manager or the CTO or whatever it is, you can say, you know, what's your top 3 priority of things to fix over the next 6 months outside of your sort of core product development? You know, what 3 things would you really like to implement, or would you really like to do? And that you know, I think that when you get to that part of the interview, if you can turn the questions around and really get them talking about the team, get them talking about the products, get them talking about how they're going about fixing that, get them talking about their vision beyond that, you then start to see a bit more of the human in them. You get to see a bit more about what excites them, and then, like, once, if you can build that rapport, which doesn't always happen, but if you can build that rapport, then you can start asking more pointed questions like, so what did the last, you know, how long has the team been together? I think it's important to steer away from directly asking about negative outcomes. So, you know, why did the last person leave would be a bad question. How long has the team been together in its current format would be a better way of forming that question. But it's really about then sort of trying to get them talking about their environments.
Absolutely. Okay, guys. So I wanted to also have a slot of around 10 minutes just to ask you about horror stories or funny anecdotes or things that were remarkable in your story recruiting people.
I had one. It was for an investment bank. They were hiring engineers. They wanted people not from a banking background, and they had a guy was interviewing with these 2 VPs in an investment bank. Technically, he was very good. Halfway through the interview, he's put his hand up and said, how long is the interview likely to go on for? And they're like, well, why? And he was like, well, I'm getting a little bit hungry. So, and I don't know, we can wrap this up right now. So that was one interesting one. Another interesting one I heard was another interesting session I heard, and I hope not many people have to go through a process like this, but somebody interviewed for it's a fairly junior role, but in one of the proprietary trading firms, so the electronic trading, high frequency, low latency trading, and he was his first interview was a 90-minute Skype call. And during that Skype call, he was given 2 maths brain teasers. He was asked to talk through his CV, and he was playing a game of chess against the guy he was interviewing with at the same time. So the idea was, can he talk functionally? Can he solve problems and play chess as well? And yeah, that was quite a challenging.
Wow, that's session. Over the top. Yeah.
Well, I have plenty, but let me just mention 2. And some stuff that has to do with things that we said just now. One is about preparation and being or having the right environment to conduct the interview. So as I mentioned, yeah, just have a quiet environment, be punctual, you know, and if you are not, you know, ready to take an interview, just say, I will not show up, please let's reschedule. So I got to this interview with this person. The person was a bit late, okay. But then, for some reason, this candidate had to travel to his mom's house, okay? And when he opened the camera to just start the interview, he was at his mom's backyard. So there were plenty of chickens running and dogs barking and a horse and wow. And then I'm trying to just conduct the interview, but I got completely distracted by the animals just running behind him. And I'm trying to ask questions, but
Horses.
And then at some point I'm giving him the calling test. We conduct the interview anyways because he didn't have a better time to do it. Okay, so we did it anyways. And then I'm sending him the challenge, and we're going through the challenge, and I can hear this rooster like, go, 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 in the back, like, please, please, this is not the requirement. You cannot really concentrate. So that was a funny one, but more related, you know, be mindful and, you know, be ready, get the right environment to conduct the interview. And there is another one, well, I was interviewing this candidate and, well, he was more like a junior. And then, okay, I got to send the coding test to him. And I noticed that he started to move the camera a little bit like to the left, like, okay, and closer to him. And then when I sent him the coding test, I heard some people whispering, and then, is there anyone next to you? Oh, no one. I'm just myself here. Okay. And I noticed that there was someone next to him. But funny thing is, I was interviewing two persons at the same time. He had someone next to him telling him what to do. But the funny thing is, they couldn't solve the problem in the end. So the candidate didn't get the job, even
Oh my goodness.
someone next to him trying to help. So don't be dishonest, please. Don't be dishonest like that.
I'd say actually I messaged sort of
It's
three of my
almost like two different stories.
Sorry, I was just saying I messaged three of my contacts who are all quite senior in the software engineering world. One is quite senior at Credit Suisse, one is senior at Goldman Sachs, and one is senior at Gojek, and asked them their top three sort of common mistakes that people make during interview, or the top three reasons why they people don't get the role. And I think that really it came down to two or three key things. The first one is an attitude that people know too much, and they're overconfident, and they're not sort of willing to accept that an answer they've given may be wrong, or there may be a better way to do it. The second, so we joke, it's knowing too much. And the second one was not knowing the fundamentals. So I think if you're going for a technical interview, it doesn't matter if you don't know the really technical, really sort of advanced out there stuff. You have to know the fundamentals well. And then the third thing, which sort of was common across all three of them, is that people try to bluff their way through using buzzwords, and they misdirect, or they use you're dropping in a word where perhaps it shouldn't go, or trying to use a technical sounding word to cover over a gap in the knowledge.
So bottom line, be real. Don't bring other people into the picture, and don't pretend something that you're not. Beautiful, yeah, beautiful. Exactly. Before we jump over to the Q&A, I just wanted to give the floor to Kevin, who's a graduate of ours, and he's been very recently through an interview process. He's now working for Novada Enterprise. And I just wanted to tap on him. Kevin, if you have any story to share, or if is there anything that you want to ask to Sam and Diego, this is the right moment. Maybe Prima can mute yourself, mute you, and
yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. Hi guys. So I just got like my job. I only 3 weeks in. I'm like a junior developer. So far, I think what everyone has said is quite true. I honestly think I didn't do very well for my technical interview. So So I think the thing that got me the job was like at the end of the whole interview. I was quite honest. I said, honestly, I think I didn't do very well for this interview. Can you please give me some feedback to help me improve myself? So I think that was it. And then I think the guy liked what I said, and then he gave me an offer the next day. So yeah, be real. I think what Diego mentioned is more important. Yeah, soft skills are actually key. The guy also mentioned like he liked my communication skills and my presentations, how I presented my answers. So yeah, it's really like a math problem. If you don't get the answer, it's the process that helps you get along. So yeah, I think for me, I would like to ask, let's say for how do you how would you guys know like a candidate is promising? For example, for both Sam and Diego, like let's say the guy does not have the right technical knowledge. For maybe for future developers, how do they get what is the key characteristic you guys see that makes you want to hire this guy?
I think it's actually, no, I mean, technically it's difficult for me to talk, but I think whenever I see, particularly for junior developers, I think the single biggest characteristic is that willingness to learn and that curiosity and that desire to improve themselves. You know, if you're coming into a junior developer role, they're not expecting the world from you on how to code, on how to, you know, they're not expecting you to come in and sort of just bash something out that's going to be game changing. They're going to want to see that you take advice, that you are curious, and that you can really sort of develop yourself. I think that's really, because they don't want to have an anchor, you know. They don't want to have sort of somebody that's not gonna take it upon themselves to try and learn.
Yeah, definitely. It's what Sam was saying. You know, willingness to learn, to improve, and you know, to be challenged, to you know, to get familiar with new stuff, and you know, communication skills, soft skills, as we were saying during the whole hour. Those things are really important. And again, if you are not really experienced in, you know, a particular technology, but you are really willing to learn and you can connect the dots, even though you can answer most of the questions, but you can connect the dots and you can associate concepts and terms, and you don't say keywords or buzzwords for the sake of doing it, you actually understand what's behind that, even though you don't have experience. That's a good sign. That's a good sign, and how open you are to, you know, take on new challenges and new, maybe embracing new technologies and new approaches, and just having this sense of big picture. And there is a purpose behind that. There is a reason why companies are, you know, doing microservices, or why they're moving back from monoliths from microservices. There is some reasoning over there, and if you get, you know, certain understanding of that and you're able to communicate, that's great, and there is potential. And actually, when you know, as an interviewer, when you write the report, sometimes you say, well, the candidate doesn't have really much proficiency in Golang, in Java, in JavaScript, but really has a lot of potential to learn and was able to express this and that. So those things are really important.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you very much, Kevin, for chipping in. Let's go have fun with the Q&A and rapid fire a few questions. So going out of the top, most voted question from bootcamp student. For fresh bootcamp grads with no math and no computer science background, what programming language would be suitable for learning algorithms? What is simpler? Most books now in Java. What is your reaction to that?
Python.
Nice.
Python is just easy, you know, and even, just runs everywhere. Go for it.
Even I can do
it. Well, you know, when I had to learn Pascal, Basic, Assembler, long time ago. Now this Python.
God.
There is no excuse at all. There is Python. It just works. It's like it's like a talking.
That was the advice I was given. Is HTML5 is good for the front end, but if you want something on the algorithm and on the back end side, the Python's the easiest place to start. Is the advice I've been given by a lot of people. So.
My 2 cents over there. Python is beautiful. We're starting our data science bootcamp towards the end of the year. So if you're interested, and I find Ruby also a very nice language, which is super easy, super idiomatic. But unless you have any other recommendations, people are talking about Java over here in the question. So anything that's closer to that is closer to business kind of language. But yeah. And moving up to the next one, should you apply for a job even if we don't know master some of the requested languages? I see many offers where many languages are requested. Simon is asking this.
Well, if you don't have any clue, try to get familiar and then apply, I would say, because if you don't have the basics and you don't have, you know, the fundamentals in place, it will be really hard for you to, you know, first get to the interview and then pass the interview. So it's not like it will be a waste of time, but perhaps it will not be a really nice experience for you. So first try to learn a bit more, spend some time, do some hello worlds and try to do some pet projects, and then you go for it. But don't just go for it if you don't really know, you know, 80-90% of the keywords in the JD. If you know, maybe 50%, that's okay. You know a bit of this and that, and then maybe you can learn the rest. That's fine, perhaps. But if you have no clue at all, first maybe you get filtered by the HR. So they'll say, you don't have experience in this, they'll filter your resume just straight away. So try to get more comfortable with that, get the fundamentals, get some pet projects, and try to, get comfortable with it and then apply, because otherwise the experience would not be great. If you're applying for a startup, perhaps, then maybe you can try. You can approach a person, maybe the founder or someone working in the startup in a small company and tell, are you open to consider, I know Python and you are using Golang. Are you considering someone like this? Perhaps you can try, but I would say most likely don't do it. Get yourself better and comfortable with the language first.
I think there are two parts to the answer on this. Like most of the time, if on the job description, the core language, you need to know that. So if they're saying they want somebody that knows HTML5, or if they need somebody that's got Java, then you kind of need to know that one. If the rest of the sort of technologies listed on the JD are tools, or they're processes or things like that, sometimes a lot of these don't, they perform a function which could be done by a number of different things. So I think you have to know the core one. The only time where I would say that that's not the case is when you are applying, you're more senior and you're sort of very, very astute at a particular language like Java, and somebody's applying for the job description request for somebody with Golang or Kotlin or something more modern, because there's really not that many people in the market with good Golang or Kotlin skills. Often they'll take people from a Java background who've got very proficient Java and cross-train them. So I guess if the languages are related, then they'll consider moving people across. So.
Nice. I think with Josh is asking something that we tapped on relatively, but maybe we can go a little bit more in depth. Is it common to do in interview challenges for junior developer positions? And typically, how complex are they? Is it usually just one or many?
I think it's common for people to have to do in interview challenges. I think it's pretty much the only way to screen people. I wouldn't expect more than a couple for an early stage challenge, but I'm sure there's going to be one. A lot of companies now are gamifying recruitment, and they're using tools where the first round is a technical challenge. They'll use a tool like Hacker or one of the other many tools that are out there, and then you'll have to pass a coding test before you get to speak to anybody. So.
Okay. I think if you are a junior, the interviewer knows you are a junior. So still there will be a coding challenge, there will be a problem, but perhaps you will get more help, and maybe the interviewer will collaborate with you to get it done. But they really want to see if you how do you approach a problem, and how do you try to solve a problem, and how do you communicate. That's always a must. There will be some concessions if you're a junior, but the problems will be always there.
Like Harshil has a very specific question. You talked a lot about potential, but how to demonstrate potential working from home as a remote team member, right? How can you demonstrate that you are really good when you're working independently?
I think after COVID, everybody's going to have that skill in their CV. So
I can do that, man. Absolutely.
I think it's going to be down to showing projects where you've done it before. I think it can be difficult. It can be difficult to quantify something like that. But I think if you have examples of work that you've done from home, you can lead with those, or you can put something into your profile that directs people towards that.
Cool.
Yeah, something like that, and also showing some sort of discipline that you can stick to by mentioning the projects and the practices and how do you go about it. I think you can showcase that discipline and certain I would say approach, like how do you work on a daily basis, what kind of things do you do, for how long you've been working remotely. If you are able to answer these questions and show some discipline, I think that's a good way to put yourself like, this candidate is used to work remotely and is very comfortable with distributed teams.
Fantastic. So I'm just going to close the Q&A with the last upvoted question. what are, I think you mentioned some already, Diego, but what are some of the resources you would recommend to prep besides Hacker Bronk?
Well,
I can maybe write them in the chat too.
Which is called Interview Cake, which has a bunch of problems. And, you know, the creator, the founder also walks through the solutions or through different solutions. So you can use that, Interview Cake. There are similar projects. You can just look for it. And Hacker Bronk also is a good source. But what is important also is to think and reflect about the solutions and to think in how many ways you can solve it, perhaps not in a very efficient way, perhaps in a, you know, in a very efficient way, and maybe try to do it in different languages, not only, you know, using the same language all the time, just to get comfortable with the syntax of, you know, Python, Golang, Ruby, and just try to explore those things. Don't think that you'll be wasting time by, you know, working in a language that perhaps you're not going to use. In fact, it adds to your profile, and, you know, maybe in the interview you have to do it in that particular language. So get comfortable with that and use these tools. There are plenty of tools, and I'm also, you know, launching something related to that. That's my project. So maybe, you know, we can work together to solve the particular problem, do a live coding challenge or a mock interview. So that's something I'm also doing and helping candidates these days. But there are plenty of resources and things that you can look online. And don't look for the solution, okay? I can't solve the problem. Very first 10 minutes, oh, I don't know how to do it, and look for a solution. Don't do that, because then you don't have the discipline just to get it done, right? Just spend some time on it and just sort of reflect about the different solutions and approaches you can follow.
Fantastic.
I don't have an awful lot more to add other than just, you know, get your fundamentals right. Get solving algorithms, get problem solving skills up, learn your basic syntax and your basic sort of things, and yeah, that's
fantastic, guys. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your expertise with us today. It's super appreciated. Like, it's been wonderful to have you. Diego, I think you still wanted to talk about Tech Round.
Yeah, if you go to techround.io, you can just, you know, schedule a mock interview, perhaps with me or with some other engineers from very interesting companies here in Singapore, just to prepare better for your interviews. So you can go to techround.io and then schedule a mock interview, and maybe we can work together just to solve particular challenges, some problems, and then at the end you get feedback. You get all the points where you can improve and the things that you can look online, or maybe some resources to just improve yourself, and then later get your real interview. So yeah, maybe you can go to techround.io.
Diego, I'm going there right after I close the Zoom. Like, I'm signing up like immediately. That sounds really, really cool. Sounds amazing.
Awesome, great.
Cool. Unless there are any closing thoughts, I just wanted to say a big thank you to everybody. Thank you very much for being with us today. Again, remember, if you consider joining us very soon, we have funding opportunities and we have discounts available. If you want to go further, go to our website, schedule a call. It would be fantastic to have you in our next batch. Big thank you to Diego. Big thank you for Sam. Big thank you to Prima and Rachel, who are in the background helping me out, and to all the alumni who showed up today. Also, Kevin, thank you for jumping in. It's been fantastic. If you have any questions, anything you want to check with us, just check out. And if you want to practice, go to techround.io. Sounds amazing. Okay. So yeah, I think that with that, I'm just going to stay around if anybody has questions, want to say anything on the chat, but I would consider the session finished. Thank you again to everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much.